In this lesson, you will learn how to configure roles in teams, explain team hierarchy, and add, delete, and manage users and user permissions. You will also learn how to configure and manage Sla templates and backup and restore the FortiSOAR configuration files. In this lesson, you will learn about the topics shown on this slide. After completing this section, you should be able to achieve the objectives shown on this slide. By demonstrating competence in configuring and managing teams and team hierarchies, you will be able to ensure administrators are operating within their assigned roles, thereby mitigating risk to your organization. FortiSOAR gives you the power to assign levels of accessibility to users with role-based access control, RBAC, combined with team membership. You can grant access to specific modules on FortiSOAR to users based on their role permissions. Users exercise their permissions in conjunction with their team membership. Appliances are governed by the same authorization model. The security model within FortiSOAR achieves the following four essential security goals. Grants users the level of access necessary based on your desired organization structure and policies. Supports sharing of data for collaboration while still respecting your team boundaries. Supports data partitioning and prevents users from accessing data that is not explicitly meant for them. Restricts external applications and scripts, appliances, from using the API beyond the requirements for accomplishing the desired RESTful actions. In the example shown on this slide, the SOC team is the parent of L1, L2, and L3, so the members of the SOC team can act across all records of the L1, L2, and L3 teams as if they are a member of all teams. Note that you can achieve the same result by adding managers to every team in the organization. However, managers would then never be able to own any records exclusively. The legal team is unrelated to all other teams in this case, which means that the SOC team is isolated from all the legal team's records and vice versa. If the legal team were related to the SOC manager's team, you would have seen the relationship in one of the swim lanes. To summarize the relationships in this view, the SOC managers effectively own all records of L1, L2, and L3, own none of legal. This slide shows a different team. If you focus on the L2 team, you find a slightly different case. The SOC team is a parent team, so you expect to see that relationship inverted. Beyond the relationship between the SOC team and the L2 team, no other relationships are implied until you put the L2 team as the team in focus. When L2 is the team in focus, you see that there is another set of relationships governing that team. The L1 team is a sibling of L2, though that is not because the teams are both children of the SOC managers. The sibling relationship has been explicitly defined between L2 and L3. You also see that the L3 team is a child of L2. To summarize the relationships in this view, the L2 team can effectively own all records of L1 and L3, own none of SOC managers' records. This slide shows that the final piece of the example comes from placing L3 as the team in focus. You know some things already about L3, namely that the SOC team and L1 team are parent teams, but you do not know about L2. When L3 is in focus, you see the expected relationships between the SOC managers and L2 team, but you now see that L1 is also a parent. To summarize the relationships in this view, the L3 team can effectively own only their own records, own none of SOC managers' L2 or L1 records. The Team Hierarchy Editor is built to centralize around one team at a time and to define how that team relates to all other teams in the system. Teams govern record ownership within the FortiSOAR security model. Team hierarchy reflects how team ownership relates between discrete teams. Use the Team Hierarchy Editor to define team relationships in accordance with each team's relationship with other teams in the system. The table on this slide shows the possible team relationships. A simple organization chart cannot capture the relationships in this definition. The real structure looks more like a mind map. This helps to support more advanced team relationship use cases, such as allowing for internal investigations among existing users, without alerting the user and providing legal personas with their own permissions during incidents. Records created by nth level of team hierarchy are visible to parent teams. For example, records created by grandchildren teams are visible to the grandparent teams. There is no inheritance of relationships among teams or implications from one team's relationship to another. For example, if two teams are children of a parent, this does not mean that the children are siblings to each other. If you want them to be siblings, then you must explicitly define them as siblings. Good job! You now understand security management. Now you will learn about role configuration and management. After completing this section, you should be able to achieve the objective shown on this slide. By demonstrating competence in understanding the default roles and configuring roles, you will be able to ensure administrators are operating within their assigned roles, thereby mitigating risk to your organization. By default, FortiSOAR has at least one role in place after installation, the Security Administrator. The Security Administrator role starts by having full CRUD permissions across the security module. This allows the Security Administrator to add and manage roles and teams within the application. The Security Administrator role also has CRUD permissions on the Secure Message Exchange and Tenants modules so that this role can configure multi-tenant systems. The Security Administrator should be assigned to someone who has been tasked with the responsibility for building and maintaining the role and team structure for your organization. It is recommended that you do not remove the Security Administrator role. If you remove the Security Administrator role, you must ensure that at least one other role with an assigned user has the security module enabled if you always want to maintain access to edit teams and roles within the application. You can assign the security module to another role or to another user as required. By default, apart from the Security Administrator role, FortiSOAR generally also has a few more roles defined. The Application Administrator role grants access to configure application settings found in the Application Editor section of the Settings page. All users must have read privileges to the application module to be able to use the application interface. You can restrict non-human users, API users, from entering into the application GUI by not giving them any access to the application module. The full app permission user is a root user who has full permissions across FortiSOAR. However, data partitioning is still in effect depending on the team to which the full app role user belongs. The result of data partitioning is that a user with a full app permissions role might not see all the data within the application unless they have made their team a parent of all other teams in the application. Good job! You now understand role configuration and management. Now you will learn about user configuration and management. After completing this section, you should be able to achieve the objective shown on this slide. By demonstrating competence in configuring and managing users, you will be able to ensure administrators are operating within their assigned role, thereby mitigating risk to your organization. This slide shows an example of a user configuration. Enter the user details on the New User page. Note that the username field is mandatory and case-sensitive, and it cannot be changed once it is set. All new users, including the CS admin user, must change their password when they first log in to FortiSOAR, regardless of the complexity of the password assigned to the users. After you configure a valid email ID in the user profile, then you can reset your password whenever required by clicking the Forgot Password link on the login page. Use the Smtp connector to configure SMTP, which is required to complete the process of adding new users. You can use the SMTP connector to send email notifications. If you have not configured the SMTP connector, the user is created. However, the system cannot send the password reset notification link to the users, and therefore the process remains incomplete. Locked users are those who have exceeded the number of authentication tries allowed within a 1-hour period. You can define the maximum number of attempts allowed before the user is locked. Only an administrator who has CRUD permissions on the People module and read and update permissions on the Security module can unlock the user. By default, users can enter an incorrect password 5 times while logging into FortiSOAR before their account gets locked for 30 minutes. A security administrator can change these default values. From version 7.0.0 onwards, administrators cannot lock a user using the FortiSOAR GUI. However, administrators can unlock a locked user using the UI by clicking the Unlock checkbox on that user's profile page and then clicking Save, or locked users can wait for 30 minutes before their account gets unlocked. Good job! You now understand user configuration and management. Now you will learn about authentication. After completing this section, you should be able to achieve the objective shown on this slide. By demonstrating competence in configuring user accounts and LDAP integration, you will be able to set up FortiSOAR to import and authenticate LDAP users. Security Assertion Markup Language, SAML, is an XML-based open standard data format for exchanging authentication and authorization data between parties, particularly between an identity provider and a service provider. The single most important requirement that SAML addresses is Web Browser Single Sign-On, SSO. SAML defines 3 roles: principal, generally a user, identity provider, IDP, and the service provider, SP. The principal is generally a user that has an authentic security context with IDP and who requests a service from the SP. IDP is usually a third-party entity outsourced to manage user identities, or in other terms, an IDP is a user management system. The IDP provides user details in the form of assertions. Before delivering the identity assertion to the SP, the IDP might request some information from the principal, such as a username and password, to authenticate the principal. SAML specifies the assertions between the 3 parties. In particular, the messages that assert identity that is passed from the IDP to the SP. In SAML, one identity provider can provide SAML assertions to many service providers. Similarly, one SP might rely on and trust assertions from many independent IDPs. The SP maintains a security wrapper over the services. When a user requests for a service, the request first goes to the SP, who then identifies whether a security context for the given user exists. If not, the SP requests and obtains an identity assertion from the IDP. Based on this assertion, the service provider makes the access control decision and decides whether to perform some service for the connected principal. Each IDP has its own way of naming attributes for a user profile. Therefore, to fetch the attribute details for a user from an IDP into the SP, the attributes from the IDP must be mapped to attributes at the SP. This mapping is taken care in a separate part of the SP. If the attribute mapping is not set correctly, The SP sets default values for mandatory attributes like first name, last name, and email. Good job! You now understand authentication on FortiSOAR. Now you will learn about appliance configuration. After completing this section, you should be able to achieve the objectives shown on this slide. By demonstrating competence in understanding and configuring appliance users, you will be able to automate many tasks and playbooks on FortiSOAR that must talk to appliances outside the network. Appliance users are usually used for authenticating on FortiSOAR while calling custom API endpoint triggers. You use an appliance user mainly while configuring auto-forwarding of events and alerts from a SIM to FortiSOAR. Otherwise, you may need to add a user password in plain text in the configuration files. Like users, you must assign appropriate roles to appliances and also add the appliances as members of the teams who run playbooks so that appliances can access or modify any data within the system. Team hierarchy restrictions that apply to users also apply to appliance users. As a good security practice, it is recommended that you scope the role and team of an appliance and give it the least number of privileges it needs to do its job. Appliance users differ from users, people, in a few essential ways. The most important one is that API access for appliances uses HMAC verification as opposed to issuing a token from the authentication engine. The authentication engine uses the HMAC signature to validate the public-private key pair, which is issued at the time of when you create the appliance. Appliance users also do not have a login ID and do not add to your license count. Good job! You now understand appliance configuration. Now you will learn about Sla Template Management. After completing this section, you should be able to achieve the objectives shown on this slide. By demonstrating competence in understanding and creating Sla templates, you will be able to set up Sla management services for incidents and alerts. You can create Sla templates for each. A service level agreement, SLA, defines the level of service you expect from a vendor, laying out the metrics by which service. A service level agreement, SLA, defines the level of service you expect from a vendor, laying out the metrics by which service is measured, as well as remedies or penalties should agreed-on service levels not be achieved. FortiSOAR provides you with an Sla Templates module you can use to create built-in Sla management for incidents and alerts. You can define SLAs for incidents and alerts of varying degrees of severity and track whether those SLAs are met or missed. To use the SLA feature, you must install the FSR IR content pack on a fresh installation of FortiSOAR. You must deploy your FortiSOAR license before installing the FSR IR content pack. Also, never install the content pack after you have modified any data or have any existing data. If you proceed with installing the FSR IR content pack after you have modified or added data, then the customizations or data might be lost. The FSR IR content pack contains the Case Management Playbooks collection that automatically tracks the SLAs of the case management workflows and other out-of-the-box OOB playbooks that demonstrate various use cases. You can also use the SLA calculator connector and playbooks associated with it to calculate when the SLAs are due based on the locale and work hours that you have specified. You must be assigned a role with a minimum of create, read, and update permission on the Sla Templates module and Playbooks module, along with the default read permissions on the Application module to create and manage SLAs. You can create SLA templates for each level of severity of incidents or alerts. You can set SLAs for both alerts and incidents using the same SLA template. For example, you can create 5 SLAs for incidents at severity levels critical, high, medium, low, and minimal. When creating an SLA template, select the severity level of the incident for which you are defining the SLAs. For example, if you select the severity as critical, and you specify the acknowledgement time is 10 minutes and response time is 15 minutes, this means that to meet the SLA, users must acknowledge incidents within 10 minutes and respond to the incident within 15 minutes of incident generation. From the Incident ACK SLA Tracked On drop-down list, select the status in which the incident will be marked as acknowledged. You can follow the same method to configure the SLA for the alert. Good job! You now understand SLA Template Management. Now you will learn about backup and restore processes. After completing this section, you should be able to achieve the objectives shown on this slide. By demonstrating competence in understanding backup and restore processes, you will be able to backup and restore the FortiSOAR configuration files on different FortiSOAR instances. You must have root or sudo permissions to perform backup and restore. To perform a restore, move the backup file to the new FortiSOAR server. Use the CLI command shown on this slide to restore the data. After you press the Enter key, you must provide the path of the database backup file. Note that the backup process stores the backup in a locally saved file. After you restore FortiSOAR, you must get and deploy a new license for this FortiSOAR instance. Your existing license will not work on the restored instance. If you back up a FortiSOAR instance that has Secure Message Exchange enabled and is using a signed certificate, then you must reapply the signed certificate on the new instance. Congratulations, you have completed this lesson. Now you will review the objectives that you covered in this lesson. This slide shows the objectives that you covered in this lesson. By mastering the objectives covered in this lesson, you learned how to configure roles in teams, explain team hierarchy, and add, delete, and manage users and user permissions. You also learned how to configure and manage SLA templates and backup and restore FortiSOAR configuration files.